the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedjot. A Kohen Gadol is the Kohen Gadol who is the leader of all the Kohanim and the holiest of all the Kohanim, and was chosen by Hashem to do the wonderful work of doing the service in the Beis HaMikdash. But he was chosen the job of doing things even greater than a regular Kohen. A Kohen Gadol was able to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur and ask for the atonement of all of Bnei Israel. A Kohen Gadol had powers not like a Kohen Hedjot, but a Kohen Hedjot, a regular Kohen, had the job of bringing karbanos every single day in the Beis HaMikdash, cleaning the Beis HaMikdash, and all the other jobs in the Beis HaMikdash. Let us look, this week's parasha, Parashas Tetzaveh, talks about the different clothing of both the Kohanim, the regular Kohen Hedjot, and the Kohanim Gadolim, a Kohen Gadol, a high priest. Let us begin with the Michnasayim, the pants. The Michnasayim were the pants worn underneath all the clothing by the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedjot. They were shorts. They were made from white linen. As you can see, they are not colored in, they are plain white. White linen that went from the waist of the Kohen, from the waist up until the thighs, just above the knee. And these were worn underneath both the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedjot's clothes. The Michnasayim, the pants. Next came the ketonet, the tunic, or what we would call just a regular outer garment, a regular robe, a regular dress. This was made from white linen, the same as the white linen used for the Michnasayim. However, the ketonet had a woven weave that looked like checkers, and these checkered indents of the ketonet looked like the checkers of the gold that was on all the ornaments in the Beis HaMikdash. The ornaments had gold woven weaving that were like the tunic that the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol wore. The Kohen and the Kohen Gadol wore this tunic. It was tight-fitting. It fitted tightly to their bodies. And both the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedjot both wore these over their shorts, their Michnasayim. So this, as you can see here, is a ketonet, a tunic. Next came, as you can see here, is a Kohen Gadol wearing his ketonet. Next we learn about the avnet, the sash. Both the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedjot wore a sash, an avnet. This avnet sash, although I was not able to draw it here, we have done models and I have told you that the avnet sash was embroidered with beautiful flowers. The flowers were made from linen, from white linen, mixed together with wool. Wool of turquoise color, of scarlet, crimson, red wool, and purple wool. And these were woven to look like flowers and made a very long sash that was wrapped around the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedjot, like that. Interestingly, this avnet was made from wool and linen. Whereas a chok, there's a law that you are not allowed to mix both wool and linen in the same garment. However, the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedjot wore them, and we will learn why a little later on. And lastly, the last garment that was worn by the Kohen Hedjot, the regular Kohen, was a migba'at, a hat. The migba'at hat was like a mini turban around their head that sat atop their head. It was also made from the same white linen as the Michnasayim, the pants, and the ketonet, the tunic. However, the Kohein Gadol also wore a hat, but a much fancier one, which is why we call it the turban, a mitznefet. It looked much more beautiful. It was much more fancy. It was a beautiful turban that lay upon the Kohen Gadol's head. So before we move on to the other 4 garments that the Kohen Gadol wore, let us first look at a summary of the Kohen Hediot, or a Kohen Hediot wore. If we look at the top, we have the mitznefet, the mikbat, his hat. Then we have the ketonet, the coat, followed by the avnet, the sash, and underneath, which we cannot see here, is the michnasayim, the pants. So the Kohen Hediot wore michnasayim, ketonet, avnet, and a mikbat, pants, a tunic, a sash, and a hat. The Kohen Gadol wore all these 4 garments, except that his hat was more fancy, plus another 4. Let us continue to go on to the Kohen Gadol and the wonderful clothing the Kohen Gadol was worthy of wearing. So now the very first garment that was belonging to only the Kohen Gadol was the me'il, the robe. There are arguments as to whether the robe, the me'il, was made from turquoise or light sky blue wool. However, we know it was a bluey color. The me'il, the robe, was worn over all the other previous 4 garments that we mentioned, the michnasayim, the ketonet, and the avnet. And now over it was the me'il, the robe. It was worn underneath the ephod, the apron, which we'll learn about soon. The me'il was made from turquoise wool, and the wool was stranded with 12 strands of wool. Each strand was made of a thick strand, and each strand was connected to form the me'il, the robe. At the top of the me'il, you can see over here, there is a collar. In those days, it was not normal to have a collar. However, the me'il had to have a collar, because there was a halacha that Hashem made. Hashem gave a decree that the me'il may never be torn, and so it had a collar to prevent it from fraying and tearing. Something which we are not used to today, because today we are used to having collars, so we're not used to the fact that if something does not have a collar or a hem, it can tear very easily. All of our clothing have collars and hems. In those days, not everything had a collar and hem, so it would tear very easily. However, the me'il was forbidden to tear, and so it had a collar. Now, at the bottom of the me'il, as you all learned since you were little kids, were pomegranates and bells. The pomegranates were woven from wool. They were not real pomegranates, they were merely pomegranates woven from wool, made with the very same colors as that of the avnet, if you remember. Does anybody remember the colors of the avnet? You are correct. The colors of the avnet were turquoise, purple, and red. And the and the pomegranates were made with the same color: turquoise, purple, and red. And it also had a bell. The sequence went a pomegranate, a bell, a pomegranate, a bell. And the reason why the Kohen Gadol wore a me'il with bells on the bottom was that people should know he was coming and be prepared to greet his holy presence. It says that if a Kohen Gadol walked into the Mishkan not wearing his me'il, he was worthy of death. He had to be wearing his me'il all the time when he was in the Mishkan. The ephod went over the me'il. And what you see here is actually the back, would be the back of the Kohen Gadol. Because the ephod was put on the back of the Kohen Gadol, and the sides, like one side over here, and the other side over here, were wrapped around the front of the Kohen Gadol. These were two straps that went over the Kohen Gadol's shoulders, and these two black things, which I'll explain, are actually stones, went over the front of the Kohen Gadol. In that manner. This was the ephod that wrapped around the front, and over the shoulders, over the back, came these two straps which would hold stones in. The ephod was made from 28 strands of material. The 28 strands were divided as follows. I will write them on the board for you while you are listening. They were made from 4 gold strands, mixed. Each gold strand was mixed together, 1 gold strand with 6 turquoise woolen strands, another gold strand with 6 purple woolen strands, another gold strand with 6 red golden strands, and 1 last gold strand which was stranded together, was wrapped together with 1 white linen strand, with 6 white linen strands. And so the ephod was made up of the colors of turquoise, purple, red, and white, just like the pomegranates and the avnet on the Kohen Gadol originally. Now, if you can see at the top here is a belt, actually they tied together, that tied the avnet on the ephod on to the Kohen Gadol. The halacha was that this belt was not allowed in any way to be made separately from the ephod. It had to be woven together with the ephod. So it was not allowed to be made separately and then attached. It had to be woven at the same time. At the top of the ephod were these 2 what we can see black things. They were actually onyx stones, and engraved in them were the names of the Shvatim in the order of their births. On the side of the board, I will write for you the order of the births of the Shvatim. It began on the right-hand side of the Kohen, on this side. The onyx stone had written it. Sorry, this side was the right-hand side. Had Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Dan, and Naphtali. On the left-hand side, there was Gad, Asher, Yisachar, Zevulun, Yosef, and Binyamin. These onyx stones were then placed in gold settings on the golden straps of the ephod, and they were placed on the Kohen Gadol's shoulders to remind the Kohen Gadol constantly that Bnei Yisrael had the zchut of all the Shvatim above them, and he was to continue that zchut. He was to continue the good name of Bnei Yisrael and lead them in the proper manner. Attached to these onyx stones was a golden chain that was made to hold the Choshen Mishpat. As you can see in this picture, we have these golden chains which are going to hold the Choshen Mishpat that would lie on the chest of the Kohen Gadol.